Welcome back to the Girls in Marketing podcast. We're officially on season 6. This season, we're mixing things up. Every episode, we'll be diving into the latest trends, reports, and insights in the marketing world, keeping you up to date with all the newest strategies and game-changing campaigns. Now, it's been an eventful few months. Social media genuinely feels like chaos. TikTok has faced a temporary ban in the US, and X is stepping up its game with a new video tab for US users. What's really clear, though, is that people are craving authenticity. 93% of consumers want brands to feel relatable and real, with transparency being the key to building that trust. So this week, we heard from a special guest who shared some thought-provoking insights, and we're also loving Uber's out-of-home campaign, as well as Refi's January reset, both inspiring a fresh start. Let's dive in. So, there's been a lot happening in the world of marketing, social media.
Yeah.
Let's chat about it. I feel like it's very overwhelming right now to be a marketer. How do you feel?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot going on. Obviously, with the new setup of the podcast, we are going to be talking about these sorts of things regularly, updates, things that are happening in a bid to help hopefully alleviate some overwhelm just by, I guess, trying to give a bit of a roundup of things that are going on. And hopefully it won't always be super social media focused, but I do think that today it probably will be because there's just been so much going on in that space. I mean, unless you've been living under a rock, of the, TikTok US ban, the lifting of the ban, everything that's going on surrounding that, everything that impacted it in terms of cap cut and stuff as well, which I think was crazy. We had TikTokers in the US. I mean, there was that whole trend, wasn't there, where people were coming on and confessing these deep, dark confessions because they were convinced that TikTok was going to be gone. And then 12 hours later it was back again. And then
Exposed.
It was hi, we're back. So there's been a lot going on. And I think it's interesting, even though it wasn't in the UK, to have a chat about, I guess, what that whole shift and what that happening kind of meant for, well, generally, worldwide creators, but UK creators, UK brands, just what it kind of signifies, I guess, for marketers and maybe kind of some, things to think about, learning outcomes, things that maybe we think about we might need to do as marketers.
I think the main thing really is the key thing that anyone took away from the whole TikTok potentially being banned for a little bit, coming back is diversify the platforms that you're on. I think so much that creators and marketers, they stick to one platform and they think it works for me, so that's fine. But actually, you had so many TikTokers that were like, I don't have any other platform, so now I'm going to go to YouTube, but they've grown an audience on a certain platform.
Yeah, 100%. And I also think that we saw a lot of people who, I don't know, maybe claim to be social media experts, but I don't know, some of the things that we're saying, I was just I'm not necessarily sure. Quite a lot of people that I saw anyway, a lot of advice was kind of, shift to Instagram. And I don't necessarily think that. I think Instagram is a replacement platform for TikTok at all, really. I mean, it's funny because actually there have been quite a few shifts in Instagram's features. And I think that they've hard launched quite a few features that in a very interesting time frame that coincided quite nicely with the TikTok ban. And I think they wanted to position themselves in that moment as the alternative, but I don't necessarily think that Instagram as a platform has that same user base and people go there necessarily for that same thing. I think there are similar features and similar elements, but I agree. I definitely think that, it kind of proves that, we've seen it throughout the history of social media. No platform is, completely safe always and nothing's ever going to happen to it. But I've also seen quite a lot of people, I don't know if you've kind of seen this as well, people saying, you also just can't rely on social media in general because it's not an owned platform.
True.
Which I do definitely agree with. And I think that it's very, smart, I think, to be building your own kind of owned audiences alongside social media. So, building up a mailing list or, working on something that's owned that people can't take from you, building up content somewhere else that can't disappear overnight, whether that's based on your website or you're building, I don't know, a Substack or whatever it is. But equally, I also do think that that's an amazing thing to have as well as social media. But really, for most brands, if they're subscribing to your mailing list, it's because they want to hear from you directly. But most of the time on social media, like individuals and consumers, they're not going out and seeking individual brands on social media, are they? Like, I don't go onto my Instagram and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go and see what funny post like Monzo's done. If it comes up on my feed, or if I see a funny TikTok by a brand or something like that, I'll, generally engage with it. It'll make me feel something. It'll probably, whatever it does, but I'm not seeking out that brand specifically. So I think it's like the advice of like, building up your own audience is really good, but I do think it needs to be a strategy alongside the use of social media as well, doesn't it? Because it's like the two serve like different purposes, really.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, that's the same with anything, because you hear of business owners that really want to focus on paid ads and it's like all they ever do. And then it comes to a time when they're like, actually, we should be focusing on SEO or we actually need to be focused on email, because they realise that they've got no organic sort of audience. Yeah. And as you say, if you can build up, traffic or people knowing your brand, then you don't necessarily need to have tons of social media followers. It's not always about like, oh, the engagement or social media followers, but it's more your brand being front of mind when they come to a certain problem or something like that. And I do think that comes into everything really, especially social media and things being banned. But funny that you mentioned about Instagram, because I really think Instagram just have FOMO. They just want to be anything.
Yeah, and it's been chaotic.
Yeah.
So if you are a marketer that uses Instagram as a brand, or whatever, I'm sure you'll know of Adam Mosseri. I think that's how you pronounce his name, and he's always coming with the latest Instagram updates, and like it's been quite chaotic, and there's been a lot of changes. Like the change to the grid, the Instagram grid with the like the size of the posts on the grid caused quite a lot of controversy. A lot of people really didn't like that, because a lot of people, although I would say I'm not necessarily one of those people who's like, the aesthetic of your grid and the way it's curated is the most important thing on Instagram. I don't think it is. But a lot of people spend a lot of time, like brands, they have like a very clear, kind of brand look and feel and a structure to the way that they structure their posts on Instagram, so that if you come and land on their page, you see a certain aesthetic. They were formatted in that kind of square Instagram grid shape, and then it skewed things massively. But it was like they just kind of went, I don't know, what it felt like was that they went, everyone's leaving TikTok, let's make the Instagram grid feel more like TikTok.
Yeah.
And let's just change it now. There was no prior warning. There was no, this is going to be phased in by this time. So if you want to start making changes, this is what you need to do. It was like done. And then they kind of, I think, realised the upset that it caused. And then kind of were like, we realised that we've done some stuff and we're going to kind of take a bit of a slower approach. And yeah, I do agree. I think that sometimes it is just a bit of like we need to be what every other platform is.
Yeah, I don't, you know what, I really don't blame them, because at the end of the day, TikTok's done really, really well. And because it's done well, all the other platforms, especially Meta, because obviously they've got kind of Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, and they just want to stay relevant. And I don't blame them. It's kind of that person who's like, please, can I just stay relevant all the time? But actually it's like, maybe you should just do your own thing, stay in your own lane, and people will still like you.
And you'll be relevant like for that reason.
Yeah.
Like you'll be relevant for doing what you do well.
Exactly.
Because they've started to introduce longer reels, I think up to 3-minute reels, which again, I think the thing that people find with Instagram as well is that it's not necessarily, and it's the same for me, I don't have a problem with them making updates to the platform, because I think that's how social media platforms evolve. I think it's just sometimes the updates fly in the face of things that they said not that long ago. When they're like, this is how, you should create content, really short content performs better, this performs better, that performs better. So you're like, right, okay, we've got it. And then it's like, right, here's 3-minute reels. And then you're like, why? Because it just throws everything up in the air, doesn't it? So I think as marketers or as creators on Instagram, you've just got to be prepared for the unexpected.
Yeah,
a lot
for sure. I think that's why TikTok did so well, is because it come in and it was unique. It was something, okay, we'd seen it a little bit with like Vine and Musical.ly, but genuinely it was something that people hadn't really engaged with. And then off the back of it, all of these other platforms are just trying to kind of be it a little bit. So no, it's really interesting. I do want to address the elephant in the room, which is our cups, because I actually think they're really cute. So if you're watching on video, you can see them. But I keep leaning down and I feel like it's too small for my hand. So I just want to tell everyone,
so if
you
are
watching
spill your
on video,
coffee, then that's fine.
My hand is not insanely big. The cups are quite small. I would just like to state that. Because every time I see them out the corner of my eye, I'm like, that they're actually quite small. And my hand looks really big. So it's making me feel insecure about my hands.
Yeah. So if you're watching on video, that's that.
Yeah.
Small cups.
But I want to go in to talk a little bit about X, because I think it's the elephant in the room for a lot of people. Now, I think there are communities that love it and it does really, really well for certain like brands. And I think it used to be really good, obviously, when it was formerly Twitter and for like customer service. Now, a lot of people have moved over to Threads, which I personally find kind of irrelevant. Threads. I don't know what your thoughts are on Threads.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a platform that I've taken to personally, I must say. And like, I think we've mentioned before on the podcast that I don't know anybody in my circle who is outside of the marketing space who really engages with their Threads particularly. Although, you know, in fairness, that's a fairly small sample size. But I don't necessarily, from my experience, think Threads has been huge. And yet the data kind of shows that there's been a huge uptake in the platform and there've been quite a lot of users and it's still growing. So I don't really know, but I do think it's interesting what you say about X, because there's a lot of conversation, I think, about whether brands should or shouldn't still be using the platform because of all the controversy that's surrounding it. And I think that, you know, there's kind of like an ethical conversation that comes into it. And that's what a lot of people are sort of saying. And I think it's a really difficult one and a really fine line, because a lot of the time, and we've had this conversation before when it comes to a lot of different things, and I know we've spoken about it before with days like International Women's Day, for example, and like how brands do or don't engage with things. A lot of the times feels like it almost comes down to like the social media managers and the social media teams are scrutinised for whether or not they post about something on International Women's Day or whether or not they're using a particular platform. But at the end of the day, you know, as much as the social media teams should have a say in that conversation as to what channels they should be present on, because they're the ones that have their finger on the pulse of social and know what feels right for their brand, as we know, it's not always the case that they can be those decision makers and their voice isn't always taken into account with stuff like that. There's generally like a bigger picture with that sort of thing. So I know that a lot of people and a lot of brands are kind of feeling a little bit torn about X as a platform and whether or not they should or shouldn't be using it. But I do think like functionality wise, they're seeming to lean into video a bit more as well, aren't they? Almost again, kind of coinciding with the whole thing with TikTok. They're kind of putting more, I think, creating like a video feed for like US users, I think.
Yeah.
And kind of trying to make that take off a bit more on the platform as well. So I don't know. That's interesting.
And I mean, that's kind of off the back of as well LinkedIn. So video's huge on LinkedIn at the moment. They're kind of pushing, LinkedIn are pushing video as much as possible. Although I feel like they're pushing video in certain ways, but not all types of video, because I feel like I'm seeing similar sorts of video on my feed with LinkedIn at the moment. So the kind of mid, I wouldn't say really short form, but kind of the 3-minute sort of mark. I don't feel like I'm seeing any super long form content, but I don't think I'm really seeing much that's 60 seconds or less sort of thing. So it's interesting to see all of these platforms lean into video. I personally wouldn't consume video as much on LinkedIn. I don't know how you feel about it, but I know that they're obviously pushing it.
Yeah.
I actually prefer reading and digesting on LinkedIn rather than video.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I don't know about you, but I think because for me, I obviously use LinkedIn in more of like a professional capacity. I often will use it more on desktop.
Yeah.
And I think I'm less likely to engage with sitting and watching video on desktop, because often it's like when you're working, you might either be listening to something else or not listening to anything and you don't want videos starting to kind of like blare out or whatever. And I don't know, maybe your sound's off, and I just don't think I'd sit and watch video as much on a desktop as much as what you used to doing it, scrolling on a phone, like Instagram and TikTok. So yeah, I just don't think I really use it quite as much on my phone. So maybe that's why I'm not as interested in video on LinkedIn. I mean, I think it does well, and I definitely think there's a place for it, but I wouldn't say I go to LinkedIn for video. I like to read posts, like you said.
I think it depends where you use LinkedIn, because they have the video tab on the app, but they don't really have anything for desktop. And I do tend to use it on desktop as well. But I'd be interested to know how many people use it on mobile versus desktop, because I would have said predominantly it was desktop, but I don't really know what the stats are for mobile. So it's interesting that it's interesting that it's kind of taken that that stance anyway. So let's talk a little bit about industry research. So we've covered what's happening, what's new. Industry research. So we've got 2 pieces of research we're going to talk about today. We've got the Sprout Social Index 20th edition. So that's basically talking about what consumers want on social.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
We're also going to talk about MailChimp, Intuit MailChimp, exploring brand trust in today's digital landscape. So let's talk about Social Sprout first.
Yeah, I think that ties into what we've mostly just spoken about as well.
So the Sprout Social, I'm going to read a few things from the report.
Okay.
51% of consumers use Facebook and Instagram. 37% favour YouTube and TikTok. And 93% of consumers want brands to stay true to their identity and create authentic, relatable content that resonates with their audience. Now, that last one, 93%, it's no surprise, right?
No, absolutely. I definitely think that more and more people, I mean, I do think that like authenticity is, like we say, it's become quite a buzzword, but I think that more and more consumers are becoming aware of, you know, they see through brands, they want to be able to trust brands. So I think that authenticity piece massively comes into play on social media. And I think that they want more than just brands selling themselves and just kind of that very one way promotion and one way, you know, sell on social media. I think that we've evolved way past social media just being that as a platform. But it's interesting, the other stats that you said about where people want to like go for like trends and stuff like that is predominantly like Facebook, Instagram, and kind of less TikTok and YouTube. I think that's surprising to me.
No, it did surprise me as well. I also think I'd be interested to know a little bit more deep diving into Facebook specifically, because obviously we've spoken about Facebook before. I don't think it's irrelevant, but I do think that there's certain communities of people which it's more relevant for. So I think it'd be interesting in the report if they dived into a little bit more of the specific channels and kind of what the trust is on, for example, Facebook, Instagram, that sort of thing.
And I think it'll be interesting as well to see how this evolves in the coming years in terms of the platforms that people cite as being the trusted platforms, with like the kind of the statement that Mark Zuckerberg's made about, you know, fact checking and stuff on like meta platforms. That I think will be an interesting one to see whether or not people's trust of those platforms does shift and they do start to seek news and seek, you know, cultural insights, trends, that sort of thing in other places, or whether it will have much of an impact at all. I really don't know. But I think it's interesting to me that Instagram and Facebook are cited as being kind of the preferred places to go for those things. It'd be also interesting to know what the demographics of those people are as well. But as we know, like TikTok is very much kind of has been on the rise as a search engine for, you know, for a lot of industries. So I think that will continue to rise personally.
Yeah, I love using TikTok as a search engine.
Yeah,
I think we spoke about it on the podcast before, but I feel like whenever I do anything or go away or I'm looking, my new thing at the moment, everyone, is recipes.
Okay.
So I feel like, I don't know if anyone feels like this, don't know if you feel like this, but I constantly feel like I have the same food all of the time. Well, I did before. And then I was like, how do I mix up my life a little bit? How do I spice up what I'm making every day? Because the boring stuff, I like it, but I don't love it all the time. So I've started using TikTok for recipes. Oh my gosh, there are so many cool recipes.
So what's your process then? So interested to know, because I feel like I can kind of guess what it would be. I'm guessing you're not like creator specific, like it's not, well, I don't know, maybe you found a specific TikTok creator who you will follow religiously for recipes, or I would say, did it start with like, I don't know, I'm guessing now, I feel like I'm gonna get this wrong, but did it start with like just generally searching in TikTok for inspo of like, I don't know, like similar types of meals or cuisine that you like, and then kind of seeing what comes up, then maybe finding a creator that you like, and then maybe kind of going down that rabbit hole? Is that kind of how it's gone, or?
Similar. Yeah. So I'd say I have found, I actually don't know her name, but I know her face, which is really bad. But then that just shows consumerism, to be honest. So I've done a mixture of different things. So from a search engine perspective, I love thinking about it as a consumer, but also as a marketer as well. So let's say, for example, I'm like, okay, I really feel like tacos, right? So I'm like, oh, I don't know. You know, I know how to make tacos, but normally they're just like quite boring. So I'd search into TikTok like taco recipe or something like that. So then it'll come up with loads. It came up actually with these beef garlic tacos. Oh my God, So nice.
Nice.
Really nice. Anyway, and then that was by this creator, which I don't know her name, so I can't recommend. She's really good. But she does a lot of stuff. Like high protein. I'm trying to like up my protein. So it's like high protein. So love that. And then there's been times when I've got something in the kitchen, but I'm like, I don't know what to do with this thing.
Okay.
So it happened, I don't know why, but I bought turkey mince. This is so,
and then was like, what do I do
niche.
with this?
I don't know why I bought turkey mince, but I did. And I've never used turkey mince before for anything. I've used stuff with turkey, chicken, but never turkey mince. This is a really niche thing to talk about.
Let's hope the listeners are really interested in that. Looking for recipes.
So I was like, turkey mince in the fridge. What do I make with turkey mince?
Yeah.
And I did not go to Google. I went to TikTok.
So, but the search points were starting with two different kind of issues. One was like, I want to increase my protein and I want like tacos.
Yeah.
You knew that you wanted tacos. And then one, you're kind of starting the other way. You've got the ingredients. It's like, what can I make with this?
Yeah.
But again, on both occasions, you were like to TikTok rather than
Exactly.
to Google for like a long-winded written recipe. That's so interesting.
Literally. And so I didn't know if I was like the only person sort of doing this, but I've spoken to loads of people who are actually doing it. Okay. What's more interesting is I was speaking to my auntie yesterday. So I went out for my auntie's birthday. My cousin is at university at the moment. He's 18 and he has decided he's now like a chef. He's cooking so much stuff in university. Wow. And she said he made these things the other day. I can't remember what she said. And it was like honey, sesame, chicken, something. And I was like, how's he even doing this? At university, I lived on pasta bake and rice.
Pot noodle.
And pot noodles, or like nothing, awful stuff. And she was like, TikTok. And I was like, wow. I literally do the same thing.
Yeah.
So I do think that we're seeing, obviously people are using it as a search engine now for loads of different things. But I feel like as a consumer, I'm actually using it as well as a search engine.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm stopping using Google as much.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely think in a similar way to what you said about like I've had turkey in the fridge, didn't know what to do with it. I've been using it a little bit to kind of shop my own wardrobe. Okay. So like I'll go in my wardrobe and try and like go through, I don't know, items I've maybe not worn for a really long time, or like I've got something that I've bought on a whim one time and then I'm just kind of like, I've never really worn this because I don't know how. And then I'll like search that item, like how to style X product, like X, like I don't know, like a white jumper, whatever it might be, find inspiration and be like, oh yeah, I've got something similar. And then it helps me to like piece outfits together. Okay. So it helps me to shop my own wardrobe rather than just being like, that's in my wardrobe, I don't know how to style it, I'll just take to ASOS and buy something new. I'm trying to be a bit more creative in styling what I've got. So again, it's like a looking at what have I got in the fridge, what have I got in the wardrobe, like what do I have at my disposal and how can I use it? And I think TikTok's like your best friend for stuff like that.
It is, definitely.
Hopefully this is really good advice. Really either that or we're just chatting and no one cares.
No, but I do think that it kind of plays into the whole like brand trust stuff, because I don't know if I necessarily trust TikTok as like a news outlet. I don't know if that's a bit of a bold statement.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily at this moment in time go to TikTok for news. I know there are creators who do stuff that's dedicated to news. So like this is happening, all of these different things.
Yeah.
I don't personally think I would take to TikTok for news, but I take to it as an entertainment platform.
Yeah.
Even less so, I don't really take to it as like an educational thing either.
Yeah.
I know some people do. I don't know, sometimes things come up and I'm like, oh, that's quite good. So there might be like certain things that you could do and like these are how you can do. I was mentioning about protein before, like this is how you can increase your protein intake, like all stuff like that, which is more educational. But I still lean into the more entertainment stuff. So as much as I trust the platform, I wouldn't necessarily say I use it as a news source.
Yeah. Do you think though that you could, based on the content that you're consuming, say for example, this creator who has these recipes and stuff like that, do you think that you building up that enjoyment of consuming that content, trying the recipes, liking the recipes, you would find that you would maybe then be more likely to trust a brand that they worked with or they promoted and that sort of thing? Do you know what I mean? Because like you're saying like you maybe don't trust news, but I do think there's definitely still space for brands, isn't there? Like you can build that trust with creators. You try their recipes, you enjoy the content that they're putting out, you trust what they're saying, and then they then bring in a brand collab or they start working with a brand and it's like, okay, like I trust you. There is still that scope, isn't there, massively for brands on the platform?
Actually, yes. And I was a victim of this.
There we go. See?
Yeah.
There we go.
Because, so M&S, shout out to M&S. I think it's slept on. I love it.
Yeah.
If you want to sponsor the podcast, let us know. M&S, just sponsor the podcast. A creator did a ad the other week, like 2 weeks ago. M&S has just brought out a new protein range. This is not the protein podcast, by the way. I feel like I'm talking about protein quite a lot. M&S have brought out a new ready meal. Not a ready meal makes it sound like bad, but it's not. It's like high protein ready meal, so like lunch vibes. That was an ad that he did with M&S.
Okay.
Now, I obviously didn't click the link and buy it straight away, but I don't think that was the purpose of the ad. It was more kind of awareness. The next time I went into M&S, I literally picked up 4 of them. I had one for my lunch the other day and it's really nice.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, then that ties in massively, which the point that I was going to come to next from the Sprout Social Index was that social media, I think we know anyway, but social media is playing a much bigger part, an increasingly important part in customer journeys.
Yeah.
So it's that, isn't it? It's like you said, like whether or not you click the link directly, which like you say, potentially just wasn't necessarily even the point. It's that, you know, brands' content on social media and the way that people engage with brands on social media is massively like becoming a more and more important part of their customer journey with brands. You know, it's whether it's just that, you know, you discover the brand on social media, whether it's that you build up that trust for them through those regular touch points and seeing their bits of content, whatever it might be, it is increasingly important. So, you know, as much as, you know, at the start of the episode, we were saying about, you know, like making sure that you've got your own channels and all the rest of it. There is such an important role for social media to play. It's just how you go about making sure that you're protecting yourself and your brand from any massive wipeout changes that can happen on any given platform, and just trying to stay as best as possible, as reactive as you can to all the crazy stuff that's happening all the time.
Yeah. I also think it's key to note that your people who are on your social media as a brand, they're not always new customers. I kind of think as marketers, sometimes you can get into that mindset of how do we get new customers?
Yeah.
But actually it could be current customers. So
100%.
even talking about the M&S thing before, I go to M&S quite a bit, but it's how these pieces of, so the influencer stuff and stuff that they put on social media, how that impacts my journey with them as a current customer. I think it's not just about, how do we get new customers?
Yeah.
It's also how do we about retain customers, and equally, as you say, what point that plays in kind of the customer journey overall, because I know that there are so many people who focus so much on how do we get new customers, and actually a lot of it can be loyalty as well, because, you know, I've spoken to you about these like M&S protein ranges, and it's like, okay, well, that's not even them saying anything. I'm saying it because of the journey that I've experienced, and it's the same for like so many brands, right?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Yeah, I definitely think social media is it's a platform for using it for whatever purpose, really. But it's, again, I think as marketers, always coming back to social media can be whatever you want it to be, whatever you need it to be within your strategy, but it's having that underpinning strategy. So if your strategy for social media is predominantly, you know, you're at a very early stage of your business and your brand, and acquisition is what you want, or brand awareness that then hopefully drives customer acquisition is what you want. You know, if you're kind of like, you know what, we're at a really good place, and, you know, you're thinking much more about kind of like customer loyalty, about retention, it's how does social media feed into that. I think there's a lot of kind of, you know, opportunities for social to be really a really key and vital part of your marketing strategy. It's having that underpinning solid strategy there that kind of informs what you do, and it's not just kind of like creating content here, there and everywhere just for the sake of it, not really knowing who you're trying to speak to and what you're trying to achieve with it. But that's like any channel, isn't it, like we say. So.
Yeah. We talked about Sprout Social. Let's talk about the Intuit MailChimp role of brand trust in today's digital landscape. 53% of consumers with diminished trust say increased transparency can restore confidence in brands. So being transparent about your brand actually increases that confidence piece, which is interesting, kind of leaning into what we talked about before. Younger audiences expect brands to proactively deliver tailored experiences without needing to search very much.
Okay.
Interesting, again. And 31% of consumers decide to engage with emails based on who sent them it. which I think is really interesting as well.
Yeah, that is really interesting because I think that a lot of the time there is this, I guess in the email marketing space, there's like this big thing around like subject lines being so key and personalization with like making sure that you're saying like, hey, first name, da 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 da, and all this sort of stuff. But actually, if you strip that back and you look at how important sometimes it is just that you know, they care about who the email's actually from, no matter what your subject line is, no matter how many, you know, how you formatted your email, what all of the rest of it. If your brand name and who you are is a huge influence on whether or not they open your email, it could be that the work needs to be done before they even open the email. Like you've got to do that work around like building brand trust. So how are you going about doing that as a brand? Are you a brand that they choose literally not to open your emails based off your name because they're receiving 1 million a week from you and therefore you're doing nothing to build brand trust and brand loyalty because they see your brand name and they have a negative association with it? Are you a brand that is putting a lot of time into thinking about how do we foster that loyalty and build brand trust and become a name that people do trust and therefore want to open? Obviously it's very subjective, and you know, on any given day at any given time, some people want to open an email from a brand that, you know, has something to offer them because they think, oh yeah, I actually need something to do with that, or like that's not relevant for me at the minute. That's always going to be the case. But I think there's a lot you can do as a brand to put the work into hopefully establish your brand as a trusted, like a trusted brand name. And therefore, you know, before you get into the nitty gritty of what's in the email and like what the copy is on the CTA and all of that, which obviously we know they're all important things to consider. Actually understanding, you know, what impact who the email is from has on how much people want to open it, like deliverability, all those different things. Like that's actually a really important thing to people quite clearly.
Yeah. And I do think that's true from a consumer perspective because there are certain brands that I kind of think, oh, it's like spammy or I don't even go in to read it because I've seen the brand name and I'm like, oh yeah, they send me like 20 emails a day.
100%.
I just kind of, it's that whole idea of open to delete.
Yeah.
We had Beth O'Malley on the podcast quite a while ago now.
Yeah.
She talked about the whole notion of like opening to delete. And I'd never even thought about that before, but it's so true.
Yeah.
There's so many times I'll open an email, I won't even read it. I'll just delete it straight away because I can't be bothered unsubscribing, or I'll have thought, oh yeah, I've already unsubscribed, or maybe I'll think one day there'll be something in an email that I'm interested in.
Yeah, maybe.
But I think that it's really important to know that. What I do think it's important to think about is when people are signing up for your emails, whatever brand you work for, whatever, whether it's service-based or e-com or anything like that, those first few emails you send to them are so important.
Yeah.
And don't miss that opportunity to send really good emails to those people because I genuinely think that sets the tone. So I recently purchased something. I won't talk about it, what it was, but I purchased something and the emails that I got off that brand, the first 3 emails just were so promotional. I felt personally like they weren't bothered about my preferences.
Yeah.
They weren't bothered about anything that I'd done with them.
Yeah.
And they just sent me 3 random promotional
just like
emails.
super transactional. You're just another number. They just like they've had one purchase, and it's always the case as well. You purchase something, and then you get another promotional email
with a discount code
selling you something else before you've even received that product. And it's like, do you know what? Maybe wait until you think it's probably likely that I'll at least receive what I've ordered before you start trying to like push something else at me. But I totally agree. If you feel that you've been considered in that process, that you've been nurtured, that you've really been kind of like, I mean, I say cared for as a customer. Like, obviously, we still know that it's part of, you know, just what an onboarding flow is and stuff like that. But it really does matter.
Yeah.
You know, that the brand takes, like you say, takes that opportunity to understand your preferences as a consumer, you know, to really introduce themselves as a brand and build that kind of trust with them and not just kind of go, well, they've ordered from us once, so let's just keep pushing to them, because you actually also don't know necessarily where they've come from, whether they know millions about your brand or if they've seen one ad and thought, oh, that looks like a decent product or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
They purchase it and then they actually don't really know anything about you, and it's your opportunity to kind of build that relationship, and it's wasted being like, buy another one for 10% off, and it's like, don't know.
Exactly. And I do think that it's understanding, as you say, you don't necessarily always know where people are going to come from. So making sure that you're able to tell that story, because even if people do know about you, it's still nice for you to tell them more, or give them information that maybe they've not heard before. Even that, the whole, I've seen a lot of brands doing this, the founder journey, the founder story sort of email. I found those really, really nice, but there are brands that do it and brands that they just don't really bother. And I actually think, especially if the brand has someone behind it with like a big personal brand, that works really, really nicely. So I do think it's really about understanding and thinking about those first few emails you send to people once they're on your mailing list, whether that's because they bought a product, signed up to a email, or whatever they've done. Kind of nurturing those people to make them understand more about your brand.
But that report by Ancient MailChimp it's really insightful. I definitely recommend it to anyone, any marketers really, because it's not just kind of like email and like focused on that, but it's really, really valuable. Definitely recommend giving that a read if you're interested, but also the Sprout Social report is interesting too for, kind of current trends and stuff like that. So 2 pieces of industry kind of research that are definitely worth giving a look at. So moving on to the next kind of segment is a new one that we've actually introduced to our Socialtainment newsletter, which if you're not subscribed to already is basically kind of like the written version that comes straight to your inbox of the podcast really. Obviously on the podcast you get the benefit of listening to Olivia and I and our random thoughts and ramblings and all that good stuff. But also, if you are interested, sign up to Socialtainment and you can get it to the inbox as well. But we've added a new section called Your Questions Answered, where we will kind of put questions to marketing experts, really kind of our most frequently asked questions really, and we're trying to make sure that it's like a range of people from the marketing industry with experience in a wide range of areas, and we have asked them to send us responses to those questions that we are going to play for you live on the podcast and then have a little chat about as well. So this is a bit of an interesting new feature for us, so hopefully technically it works. But the first question we asked to Jo Bird, who is a creative director and brand consultant. So she is freelance, isn't she? She has worked for big brands previously, namely kind of Gymshark. She's also been a guest on the podcast, so you may have already listened to our episode with Jo in the past, but she's great. And we asked her, how do you stand out as a creative marketer, which is something that I think we're asked quite often, aren't we, from our community?
I definitely think it's something we're interested in, and it's also something that Jo knows like tons about.
100%.
As you say, she's worked at Gymshark, she's worked at Lounge Underwear, she's done tons of stuff, she's now freelance. She's lovely, so I'm going to play her voice note now so we can listen and then we can chat about it.
How do you stand out as a creative marketer? Most people would hear this question and immediately think, how do I go viral? How do I get likes and shares and impressions? And that, to most people, is how you stand out. But what I'm really interested in is, how do you stand out because of who you are? And do you have clarity on what makes you different? And I think this is super important. I guess it's leaning into strategy a little bit more. It's because most people now jump straight to content and concepts. And what happens with that is you end up following trends instead of setting the trends, just by nature of social media and where your content is living. So I think that the brands or the marketeers that are able to really lean into who they are, to get some clarity on their brand, their persona, their personality, and to have some conviction about telling that story, are the ones that are truly deeply standing out. So you just look at your Jacquemus, your Liquid Death, your Gymshark. They each are celebrated in their own rights because they bring something just a bit fresh to the table, not being scared to really own your voice and your unique voice, and enter feedback loops with your audience, but have conviction about who you really are. And I think as a creative marketer, that is how, in this modern day that is so saturated, that is how you can stand out.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very interesting insight from Jo. As we knew we'd get a good response from Jo, so that's so good. That's great. And I think it's so true. I really do completely agree with everything that she said. It's not just about if virality is your end game and it's just like this campaign's got to go viral at all costs. It's not necessarily the flex that you think it is. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's not to say that viral campaigns can't also be really successful creative campaigns in also helping you achieve the kind of broader objectives that you've set for a campaign, but I don't think it should be the be all and end all. And I think it was interesting what Jo said about, the individuality that those brands bring. I think the storytelling that those brands bring that is different to others in the space is a massive part of why consumers flock to certain big brands and why, you know, the majority of the creative campaigns that they work on do actually really, really work. It's not that short-term viral goal.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a secondary kind of thing that comes out of it, great, but it's not the be all and end all.
Yeah, and I think as well, interesting that she talked about it's not just about getting on the trends, it's about setting them. And
100%.
I think that, you know, we talk a lot as marketers about, you know, should I jump on this trend or should I do this sort of thing? But actually, how do you go about genuinely setting the trends? How do you create something that people go, I want to also create that. I think we could do this for our brand. And I do think that it's that individuality piece and really leaning into that for sure, because so many people just think, how do I copy someone else or, you know, that sort of thing, when actually it's not really about that. It's about how do you stand out as yourself.
Yeah.
And as you say, it's down to the strategy.
Yeah, I think, and I think as an individual, if you're an individual creative marketer thinking about, okay, how can I apply this to me and my role and getting into the creative industry, I think a big part of it probably also is, you know, okay, we're saying, you know, set trends, don't copy them, but I think also that the ability to do that and the confidence, like having the confidence to do that, probably does come with experience and that knowing that, you know, things that you've done, whether they start small, the things that you're doing that are a bit different, and then they grow into bigger campaigns that actually are setting trends. You know, it's one, you need to have the support of someone saying, yes, I trust you to allow you to go ahead and do that. It's the confidence building up over time that, you know, you can do it and they can be successful. So I would say if you are a creative marketer and, you know, you're at the early stage in your career, you don't have to expect to be working for a brand that's going to be, you know, setting huge trends that everybody else is jumping on, particularly also depending on what industry you're in. It might just not be something that necessarily happens. But I think, yeah, like little by little push boundaries, you know, take risks, hopefully try and get buy-in for those sorts of things and demonstrate that doing something different actually does work. Pushing those boundaries does really kind of like pay off.
Yeah. I think we spoke about working for big brands before and you know, it's not the be all end all. You don't have to work for the flashy, the really cool brands. I actually think there are a lot of people that are flocking to more smaller brands or the kind of startups or just brands that align more with their values. And I actually really love that because for so long we've kind of thought, okay, these are the big brands with the trends and how do I get to work for these like Fortune 500 companies? But actually it's not all it is, all what you think it is. So I think it's really important to think about that and obviously have that strategy behind any sort of creative ideas that you have. Let's talk about our favourites. So I want to talk about, firstly, Roxy Nafousi. So I don't think I've ever mentioned Roxy Nafousi before, but I am relatively new to her and her work. She is the author of the book Manifest. Okay. So she didn't invent manifestation. She doesn't claim that either. I originally found her through Grace Beverley's podcast, Working Hard or Hardly Working. Love that podcast. Found her. She's actually just started a podcast called Rise. She had Jay Shetty on for the first episode. It was really good. All about finding your passion, mindset, all stuff like that. And she's just released this week an episode with Simon Squibb, who is a TikTok creator. He helps people set up businesses and kind of reach their goals and stuff like that. I haven't listened to it, but I'm really excited to. I would definitely recommend, if you're a podcast listener and you like listening to podcasts, I think discovery of podcasts is really difficult. Roxy Nafousi's podcast, Rise, is really good. So I would definitely recommend. It's Rise in all capital letters. So if you just type that in by Roxy, which is Roxie, not with a Y, it's really good. So I would recommend it.
Oh, there we go. I love that. I love a podcast recommendation for our favourite picks. Yeah, love that. I'll definitely have to give it a listen. I must admit, I'm not the best at keeping up with podcasts. Like I find one I like and then it's just finding the time to listen to them. But I will. One I was going to mention was, so I think we're all quite familiar with the brand Refi. But I think that lately they've been doing a lot of really good stuff in like the community building space and that customer loyalty kind of piece. They've kind of launched Refi World, which is, it's not groundbreaking in the sense of it's kind of like it incorporates like customer like rewards and like levels. So they have like level 1, level 2, level 3. And And it's based on kind of like how many orders you've placed. Like if you've placed
Okay.
like
a
0 to 1.
loyalty scheme.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
It's that sort of thing. But like there's like certain perks that you get dependent on the level that you're on. So like 10% off your next order, early access to sale events, members only offers, that sort of thing. And those kind of rewards increase the more that you purchase.
Okay.
So it's not, like I say, it's not a groundbreaking concept, customer loyalty and like reward schemes and stuff. But I think what they do really nicely is that they have a really, really good understanding of who their consumer base are. And I think that they've helped to kind of distribute the idea of this kind of Refi World community across their socials really, really well. And they've got people really engaged across their socials. And it's not like a, say for example, like, I don't know, your club card points or your reward schemes or whatever that you kind of like engage with as an individual of a brand that you like, but like it's not necessarily something you chat about with your friends and, you engage with on social media. But they've actually, I think, really turned it into a kind of a movement in a way.
Okay.
And I think it's been really, really good about how they've done it, and it does encourage those repeat purchases. Obviously, they've got their motives. It's customer loyalty, it's repeat purchases and retention and stuff. But they've also done off the back of it. So I think this was kind of like the back end of 2024. And then through January, they've done like a January reset where they've kind of continued that concept of like loyalty and like community, and hosted like one-off in-person sort of exclusive events and Pilates, and it's all very much kind of like based on the feel of their brand.
Yeah.
It creates that sort of buzz around the brand, people wanting to be able to go engage with them. It's definitely, I think, caused quite a bit of a hype, and I've heard quite a lot of people talking about it. And I just think it's an interesting way of doing things, and it's, shaking things up a little bit in a space, as we know, in, kind of like beauty and stuff like that. There's a lot of competition there. There are a lot of brands doing really good stuff in the space. So it's like, how do you stand out with your consumers and ensure that you're not just like a brand where someone goes like, oh yeah, I just really like that concealer. You're a brand where people, like what we were mentioning before about brand trust and all the rest of it. Like, you're a brand where people go, you're more than just that specific piece of makeup that I like. I love the brand. I love everything that you stand for. I love the way that you engage with your consumers. I love feeling a part of that community, and using that makeup is more to me than just like, putting on my eyebrows or covering my spots. Like, it's something more. And I think that they are leaning into it quite well.
Yeah, I think they have done that quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think the January reset is interesting because their consumers typically love that kind of like clean girl aesthetic.
Yeah.
And you've got that whole like Sunday reset, like
Mm-hmm.
New Year, New Me, all of that sort of thing. So I love that they've lent into that.
Mm-hmm.
And also the idea of community as well, because again, so many brands talk about community, but they actually don't do anything with it. They say, oh yeah, we've done this for our community, but actually it's not anything for the community at all.
Yeah, it's for them, and they spin it in a way that they say it's a community. And
yeah,
it's like,
which I sometimes, like, I don't love that about certain brands when they say, oh yeah, we've got this for our community, but actually they're still profiting off the back of it, or they still are doing something that actually it's not.
It doesn't really benefit.
It's not
consumers all that
amazing.
much.
Yeah, it's not really benefiting the community. So that's a really interesting one. And I think Refi is a really great kind of community brand building piece, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like the whole idea of you're going to tell your friends about it. You're going to bring your friends along to the Pilates class that maybe they've never even bought Refi before or heard of it. And it's kind of not just brand building, but also loyalty for your current customers. So it kind of touches every single point that you want it to, really. I wanted to talk about the Uber out of home campaign.
Yes,
which is it's really nice, to be honest. It's centered around pets and like dogs. I have a dog myself. So I really love the campaign. It's basically an out of home where it has the kind of nose, or like, not just nose, different parts of a pet, and then it kind of talks about like home, and it's all about obviously getting home to your pets, to your kind of loved ones and stuff like that. I really love that from them. I think Uber, I wouldn't say are massively creative these days. I don't really see tons of stuff. They have done stuff in the past.
I think they've done a couple of campaigns previously. So I think this one, the one you're referring to, I think it's with the creative agency Mother, isn't it?
Okay.
Who have done. You would recognise some of like the big campaigns that they've done previously. They work with big brands like IKEA, KFC, M&S. I think they've done potentially a couple of other campaigns with Uber, maybe, but I don't know whether that's kind of more recent. But yeah, I think those campaigns are quite identifiable. But yeah, I would agree. I think I've not necessarily seen anything quite like this from Uber before, and I love it. And I think it ties into exactly those feelings that you have of like wanting to get home to your pets. Like that's a universally felt emotion, isn't it? Like especially like maybe you've been on holiday or, you know, you've had a long day at work and it's that thing of like the anticipation of getting home to your pets. Like, are we nearly there yet? Yes, we're nearly there. We're nearly at like your loyal dog that's waiting at home for you or whatever. And it just taps into that so well.
Yeah, it's definitely like the emotional side of things, isn't it?
100%.
And I love when brands tap into emotions and feelings because at the end of the day, their consumers or the people that are buying products or services from them are humans and they do feel emotion.
Yeah.
I think sometimes brands are hesitant to kind of lean into emotion because they come across as a certain way. Maybe people won't see the things that they're doing and really like it. But I actually think it's a really nice way to kind of lean into the emotional side of, as you say, like going home and kind of seeing your pets and stuff like that.
Exactly. And I definitely think it's something that's transferable to so many other brands and industries as well. Like it doesn't have to be something as universally felt as that. I mean, obviously for Uber, you know, I hate that thing of like, you know, when you ask a marketer or you ask, maybe not a marketer, you ask someone, business owner, maybe who's your customer base, and they're like, oh, anyone could be our customers. But like, I suppose with Uber, like people of an age that they can pay for an Uber, like they could all be Uber customers because they all could just want to get from A to B. Like, okay, yes, of course, that's very, very general, and it might be more specifically like people who, I don't know, they don't have access to their own transport, or like there's not very many like public transport links or whatever. So there's obviously a lot of more like kind of niche audiences that they're gonna really tap into. But you know, even if you are quite a niche brand, your audience and your consumer base are gonna have like emotions that you can tap into, whether it's frustrations, whether it's whatever it might be. You know, there are ways that you can build that into your campaigns, even if it's more subtly than literally putting pictures of what it is that they're feeling on billboards. There's so many ways to tap into it, isn't there? And I think that the campaign by Uber is like a large scale, like really good example of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, that's everything for today. Really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah.
I think I really enjoyed the new setup. We'd love to get people's opinions on it. So feel free to let us know on socials what you thought. Give us a little message because it's new for us.
Yeah.
I think we've done well. Well done us.
Pat on the back.
Pat on the back for that. But no, I think I'm really excited for this season.
Yeah.
Got lots of really cool things to come. And for sure, the marketing world is always changing. So there'll always be updates for us to come into this session with and chat about for the podcast.
Definitely.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Girls in Marketing podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you picked up some fresh insights and maybe even a little inspiration for your next big marketing move. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate us, and leave a review. It really helps us reach more amazing marketers like you. Don't forget to let us know what you thought of today's episode as well. Tag us on social media and follow us for the latest updates, behind the scenes, sneak peeks, and fun marketing chats. We'll be back soon with another installment of trends, updates, and campaigns that are shaping the marketing world right now. Until then, get involved in the conversation on social media and check out our Girls in Marketing membership to join a community of incredibly talented marketers just like you. See you next time.